I wasn't meant to hear it. Their voices carried through the thin kitchen wall, casual at first, then sharp enough to slice through the quiet. I froze, my coffee cooling in my hand as Laura's laugh drifted out, brittle and dismissive. 5 months, she said, and she still thinks this is about family. Mark's reply came low but clear. Well, at least the rent helped while the restaurant tanked. The words hit like a slap. Suddenly, every warm dinner, every soft assurance about helping me get back on my feet, rearranged themselves into something calculated, transactional. I wasn't family, I was a temporary solution to their financial strain. My mind reeled, stitching together every small moment that hadn't felt right, the way she flinched when I used her favorite mug, how their whispered arguments always stopped when I entered the room. I stepped into the doorway, my voice steadier than I felt. I heard everything. Laura turned, color draining from her face. Megan, it's not what it sounds like, she began, one hand instinctively resting on her stomach, the subtle curve of pregnancy showing beneath her sweater. You know how stressed we've been with the business and the baby, don't, I interrupted. The word came out flat, final. For the first time, the illusion was gone, and what stood before me wasn't my sister's kindness, it was her calculation. Mark tried to smooth things over, muttering about misunderstanding, about timing, but the space between us had already changed shape. I walked past them, my pulse loud in my ears, into the small guest room that had once felt like refuge. Now it was just borrowed space in a house that no longer wanted me. My suitcase waited in the closet, half-packed since last week, as if some quiet part of me had already known. That night, as rain hammered against the windows of their Seattle home, I scrolled through rental listings I couldn't afford, my bank account shrinking with every click. The pattern had become impossible to sustain, my savings thinning, my anxiety growing in perfect opposition. By morning, I looked like hell, and I knew it. Ellen, the new designer at the firm, didn't say it unkindly, just honestly. You need sleep, she murmured, placing a steaming coffee beside my keyboard. Later that day, she pulled up a chair beside me, her tone brisk but kind. My place has a pull-out couch, she said. It's not fancy, but it's yours for as long as you need it. I started to protest, to reach for my wallet, but her hand stopped mine, warm and firm. Don't, she said softly. I was homeless once too. This is how we stop the cycle. For the first time in weeks, the tears didn't come as an explosion but as release, quiet, steady, and almost cleansing. I nodded, unable to speak. In that simple offer, something shifted, the realization that kindness could exist without condition, without expectation of repayment. Saturday came, and with it, Rebecca's baby shower, a performance I couldn't avoid. I arrived with a neatly wrapped bassinet, smiled on cue, played the part. The room overflowed with relatives, laughter, the sweet ache of false nostalgia. And then Rebecca raised her glass. I want to thank Megan, she said brightly, for being so understanding and giving us our family space back. Dozens of eyes turned to me. Don't you want to tell everyone about your new place? Silence swelled. The script was clear, lie politely, protect her image. But something inside me refused. I don't have a new place yet, I said, voice calm. The housing market's been difficult. The room froze. My mother's smile faltered, my aunt's glass stopped midair. Rebecca's cheeks flushed crimson. For the first time in months, I felt my lungs fill completely. Truth, raw and unpolished, was its own kind of freedom. It didn't solve my housing problem, but it loosened the tightness that had lived in my chest for far too long. A few days later, Ellen introduced me to her landlord, an older woman with kind eyes and a cluttered office on the edge of Seattle. The studio was tiny, barely big enough for a bed and table, but the rent was reasonable, and the windows faced east, perfect for morning sketches. The landlord, swayed by Ellen's recommendation, waived the deposit. You can move in tomorrow, she said, handing me the keys. By that evening, Ellen's friends had shown up with mismatched dishes, a futon, even a rescued desk from an office renovation. By midnight, the small space glowed with quiet warmth. My home. Not borrowed, not conditional, mine. The confrontation from the previous night didn't end when I left the kitchen. Dinner arrived with a brittle calm, but the tension was palpable, coiling in the air like smoke. Laura's eyes were sharp, scanning me from across the table as if measuring every gesture, every blink. Mark's hand stayed folded over his plate, silent, offering no shield or comfort. You've been overly friendly with him, Laura said suddenly, her voice smooth but cutting, like a knife sliding under the door. The words hit my chest, a jolt of disbelief. I turned to Mark, expecting denial, a glance, something, but he avoided my gaze, nodding faintly instead. "That's not true," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "You know it's not true." Her hand drifted to her stomach, the slight curve of pregnancy acting as a shield, a subtle barrier against contradiction. "And we've noticed some of the people you've had over when we weren't home," she added, calm as if stating facts, not lies. My fork dropped to the plate with a clatter. "What people?" I asked, incredulous. I hadn't had a single guest. Jeremy's mention of strangers? Fabrication, carefully planted. The room seemed to close in as the pattern became unmistakable. They were building a case, constructing offenses to justify evicting me now that the business windfall removed any need for my rent. Then came the ultimatum, soft but firm. "You might be happier somewhere else," Laura said, lowering herself into her chair with exaggerated care. "We'll need your room for the baby very soon." My heart thudded. "How soon?" I asked, already knowing the answer. 3 weeks, she said, slicing her dinner with precise, deliberate movements. The painters were scheduled, everything timed. My mind raced, rent applications, security deposits, first and last month's rent, a maze with no exit. I presented the bank statements, every highlighted transfer documenting my punctual payments. She barely glanced. "Family comes first," Laura said flatly. The irony burned, a bitter taste spreading in my mouth. The contract I'd been working toward demanded proximity and time, moving now threatened the culmination of months of effort. Homelessness loomed as a very real possibility, while betrayal cut through every memory of supposed care. That night, I retreated to the car, alternating between brief motel rooms, each check-in a reminder of how precarious my position had become. The kitchen I had once shared with them, the space where I'd cooked and cleaned, now belonged to strangers in their eyes. The winter chill seeped in, biting through my thin jacket, my body a constant alarm of urgency. Sleep was fractured, punctuated by the sound of keys in the lock, each turn a potential disaster. Every day blurred into calculations, listings, and strategies. The accusations, the fabricated slights, the casual dismissal of my presence, had transformed what should have been a temporary stay into a psychological battleground. They had reduced me to a problem to be solved, a room to be cleared, a means to an end, while I navigated the edge of ruin and professional ambition. In that relentless tension, I realized the truth of the situation. Laura and Mark's version of family support was conditional, manipulatively timed, and meticulously constructed. They no longer needed me financially, so they manufactured reasons to push me out, masking cruelty with the pretense of necessity. And through it all, Mark remained silent, reinforcing the distance between us, his inaction a confirmation that I had never been considered part of the household in the way I believed. The clock ticked toward deadlines I couldn't miss, deadlines that my displacement threatened to derail. Every dinner, every pointed comment, every orchestrated accusation underscored one fact: I was alone in navigating both the betrayal and the practical consequences. The warmth I once associated with home had evaporated, leaving only strategy, survival, and the quiet, growing determination not to be rendered invisible again. A few days after the confrontation, the subtle pressure escalated into relentless, crushing precision. Boxes of my belongings were already packed in the hallway, corners bent, papers and portfolios slightly warped. The Wi-Fi had been quietly disconnected without notice, making deadlines for my downtown client nearly impossible to meet. Laura moved through the house with a casual composure, her hand frequently brushing against her slightly visible bump, a constant reminder of the timeline they had set. Each small action felt premeditated, designed to destabilize me emotionally and physically. Rumors began to circulate almost immediately. The phone rang constantly. Aunt Linda's voice, heavy with judgment, accused me of abandoning my sister in her time of need, as if I had chosen to leave willingly. Every call, every message seemed orchestrated to cement the narrative that I was ungrateful, a liability, a visitor who had outstayed her welcome. Even as I listened, disbelief and frustration knotted in my stomach. They had prepared the stage, primed the witnesses, all before I had a chance to respond. I had nowhere to turn. Apartment applications piled up on my laptop, each rejection more crushing than the last. One-bedroom units within commuting distance of my client's office were either unattainable or hundreds of dollars above my budget. Security deposits and first month's rent loomed like insurmountable walls. Each "we've chosen another candidate" email chipped away at my confidence, reinforcing the cold reality that I would soon have no roof over my head. Nights became a gauntlet of survival. My car turned into a makeshift bedroom, the back seat cramped and cold. The January wind seeped through partially closed windows, leaving me shivering under a thin blanket. Some nights I found a cheap motel, its heating inconsistent, the thin walls offering no privacy or solace. Every morning I returned to the house I had called home, timing my arrival to avoid encounters, using the bathroom in the silence of empty rooms. Simple acts like making coffee or checking mail became exercises in strategic planning, calculated to avoid confrontation or suspicion. The strain on my body and mind was relentless. Exhaustion blurred the edges of the work I tried to complete, yet I could not afford to miss deadlines. Client expectations didn't pause for my housing crisis. Sketches, renderings, and presentations needed precision. Each project became a balancing act, moving between deadlines, sleep deprivation, and the emotional weight of betrayal. Laura and Mark's manipulations had created a pressure cooker, yet I had no choice but to navigate it with care. Financially, the situation was equally unforgiving. Rent payments I had made faithfully for 5 months now seemed to have counted for nothing. They had orchestrated a scenario where my contribution was only valued until it was convenient for them to dismiss me. The irony was sharp and bitter. Every ounce of effort to uphold my responsibilities was ignored while the narrative of my failure grew. Even small interactions in the house were fraught. Each glance, each casual remark from Laura carried a latent threat. Mark's silence was deafening, an unspoken agreement to their plan, reinforcing my isolation. I had been a willing participant in this home, cooking dinners, cleaning, caring for Jeremy when their babysitter canceled, yet every act of service was reframed as a strategic move in their script to remove me. The constant churn of searching, rejection, and uncertainty tested my resolve. I documented every step meticulously, mentally recording each conversation, each calculated glance, and each fabricated accusation. I was alone in protecting my livelihood, in safeguarding my career, in ensuring that my dreams were not extinguished by the very people who had once claimed to be family. Through all of it, a clear understanding emerged. I had been treated not as a sister or even a guest with dignity, but as a temporary solution to a financial and logistical problem. The home I had called my own for 5 months was no longer a sanctuary, it was a stage for manipulation, control, and power. Survival demanded every ounce of focus, every reserve of determination. I had no choice but to navigate the maze they had created while keeping my career intact, my dignity unbroken, and my future within reach. By the end of each long, cold night, when the city lights of Portland blinked through frost-covered windows, I reminded myself of one thing: despite the chaos, despite the betrayal, I had to continue moving forward. My design career depended on it, my self-respect demanded it, and my future, the one I would build for myself, waited just beyond this period of survival. The next morning at the design agency, exhaustion clung to me like a second skin. My eyes were shadowed, my hands stiff from sleepless nights, and the weight of uncertainty pressed on my chest. Samantha, a newer member of the team I had barely spoken to, noticed immediately. "You look completely drained," she said, her voice gentle but firm. I mumbled something about insomnia, trying to focus on my computer screen, but she didn't let it go. Without waiting for an invitation, she placed a warm coffee beside me and pulled up a chair. "I have a pull-out couch in my apartment," she offered casually. "It's not much, but you can stay there for as long as you need." My fingers twitched toward my wallet, instinctively wanting to pay. She laid her hand over mine, firm and grounding. "I've been homeless before too," she said softly. "This is how we break the cycle." I blinked back the tears I hadn't let myself shed in weeks. Gratitude warmed the icy knot in my chest. There was no hidden agenda, no expectation of repayment, only a hand extended, genuine and unassuming. The trust between us formed quietly, reinforced by our shared understanding of survival and perseverance. For the first time in months, the prospect of stability felt real, even if temporary. A few days later, the baby shower Laura had been planning arrived. I debated skipping it, knowing it would be another stage for manipulation and rumor, but avoiding it felt like conceding to their narrative. I carried a neatly wrapped bassinet, performing my role in the charade. The living room overflowed with relatives and friends, presents stacking high on the dining table where just weeks ago I had been told I wasn't family. Laura raised her sparkling cider glass with a practiced smile. "We want to thank Allison," she announced, for understanding our family needs and moving out so gracefully. Every pair of eyes shifted to me, expectant and observant. The weight of their collective gaze was suffocating. I could follow the script, lie politely, and protect Laura's carefully curated image. Or I could speak truthfully, even if it meant shattering the illusion. Something shifted in me then, quiet but resolute. I straightened, drawing on the strength that had kept me going through cold nights and endless rejections. "I don't have a new place yet," I said clearly, my voice steadier than I expected. "The housing market has been impossible." Silence fell like a physical weight. Aunt Linda's hand froze mid-lift with a wine glass. My mother's smile stalled. Laura's face flushed crimson. For the first time, I realized that protecting her image came at the cost of my own reality. I didn't need to appease them to validate my actions. The room's tension was palpable, yet I felt something loosen inside me, the first full breath in weeks that didn't carry the taste of fear or betrayal. In the following days, Samantha guided me further. She introduced me to her landlord, an elderly woman with several small properties on the outskirts of Portland. "It's tiny," Samantha warned on the drive over, "but clean, affordable, and yours to call home." Along the way, Samantha shared her own story, how her brother had betrayed her after their parents died, leaving her homeless in her final year of college. "Blood doesn't guarantee loyalty," she said sharply. "Sometimes family is just the people who show up when everyone else walks away." The studio apartment was indeed compact, barely enough room for a bed and a small table, yet the eastern-facing windows filled the space with perfect morning light for drawing. The landlord, impressed by Samantha's recommendation, even waived the security deposit. "You can move in tomorrow," she said, handing me the keys. "First month's rent is due next week." That evening, friends arrived with housewarming items, a futon salvaged from a guest room, mismatched dishes, and a small desk rescued from a corporate renovation. By midnight, the space already felt lived in. My single print of the city skyline hung above the desk, a symbol of continuity and ambition. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Every interaction with Laura and Mark, every false accusation and manipulation, I began to document meticulously. The record grew, a chronicle of truth that I could rely on, even if others chose to distort the story. Through Samantha's support, a fragile sense of stability returned. I still faced the daunting realities of the housing market, the professional demands of my downtown client, and the emotional weight of family betrayal. Yet for the first time in months, I felt a foothold. Someone had shown up when I had no one else to turn to, proving that support and loyalty didn't require blood. That week, I began to understand that while betrayal had tested me to my limits, genuine connection could restore faith, resilience, and the quiet courage necessary to reclaim my life. Samantha introduced me to an elderly landlord who owned a few small properties on the outskirts of Seattle. She drove us to a tiny studio apartment, warning it wasn't much, but clean and well kept. The moment I stepped inside, I felt a strange mixture of relief and disbelief. This tiny space would be mine, fully mine, for the first time in months. The landlord, impressed by Samantha's recommendation, waived the security deposit without hesitation. I could move in immediately, with the first month's rent due in a week. It felt surreal. The apartment was small, barely enough for a bed and a modest table, but the windows faced east, letting in the morning light that I'd been craving for my sketches. Every inch of this space now belonged to me, and I could arrange it exactly as I wanted. On the drive over, Samantha shared her own story. She had been betrayed by her brother after their parents passed, left homeless during her final year of college. "Blood doesn't guarantee loyalty," she said, her hands gripping the steering wheel firmly. "Sometimes family is just the people who show up when everyone else walks away." Her words sank in deeper than I expected, offering a perspective I hadn't allowed myself to consider during my months of fear and betrayal. After careful thought, I decided to accept this small studio. Friends pitched in to help me furnish it, a futon salvaged from someone's guest room, mismatched dishes, a small desk rescued from an office renovation. By the end of the first evening, the place felt like a home. I hung a single print of the city skyline above my desk, the only decorative piece, yet it transformed the room into something comforting, something entirely my own. I began to document everything from the previous months, every accusation, every act of cruelty, every minor humiliation. The record grew steadily, a chronicle of truth, a reminder of what had happened and how I had endured. This process helped me reclaim a sense of control over my life. The $182,000 contract of Laura's, which I had stumbled upon while checking her email on the shared family computer, now felt like a bitter irony. The people who had turned me out no longer needed my contributions, and the very thing they celebrated highlighted their duplicity. My own space, small and modest, was built on honesty and effort, not manipulation or deception. Living there, I began to feel a sense of stability returning. My work regained its focus. The morning light through those eastern windows inspired hours of sketching and planning. I realized for the first time that this apartment wasn't just a roof over my head, it was the beginning of rebuilding my professional and personal life. The foundation of my independence, fragile yet genuine, started to take shape. For the first time in months, I could breathe freely without fear of intrusion, accusation, or the subtle manipulations that had plagued my daily life. I was finally in a place where I could make decisions for myself, structure my work, and live on my own terms. Every object in the studio, every corner of light and shadow, seemed to echo a simple truth: I had survived, and now I could start again. Samantha's presence, though not living in the apartment with me, remained a quiet support. Her reassurance and willingness to step in without expecting anything in return reminded me that family could exist outside bloodlines. The walls of this studio, tiny though they were, contained my newfound resilience, a space where I could cultivate not just my career but my sense of self. In those first days, as I arranged my sketches, hung my limited decorations, and organized my supplies, a feeling of possibility emerged. No longer defined by betrayal, manipulation, or eviction, I could envision a life of stability and growth. This small apartment, the donations from friends, and the unexpected kindness of Samantha marked the true start of my independence. It was not grand, but it was mine, and that realization carried a profound weight of relief, pride, and cautious optimism. 13 months had passed since I was forced out of their house, and life had started to settle into a rhythm that felt precariously stable, yet mine. The phone rang one morning, and I froze at the sight of the caller ID, Laura. My chest tightened as I answered, bracing for the familiar mix of manipulation and feigned concern. "Hi, Megan," her voice wavered, unusually unsteady. Things fell apart. The business collapsed, and Mark and the kids, we don't have a home anymore. Could we stay with you? Just for a month, maybe 2? I paused, measuring my response, feeling the old tension rise, but tempered by everything I had endured since that bitter eviction. I need to think about it, I said evenly, careful to keep my tone neutral. I had no intention of saying yes, not immediately, not without processing the full weight of what she was asking. The call ended, and the familiar ping of my phone brought Sam's voice next. "Talk to me," she said softly, but with a firm undertone. "Remember why you're protecting yourself. Keeping your peace isn't selfish, it's survival. You've built this life carefully. Don't throw it away for the sake of old blood." We spent the next hour compiling information together. Emergency shelters, family assistance programs, rental aid foundations, nonprofits that helped with deposits and utility bills. Every link, every phone number, every resource went into a single document I meticulously organized. Sam reminded me repeatedly that helping could take many forms, and giving practical solutions was often more empowering than simply opening my door. Later that day, Mark called. I could tell immediately that something had shifted in his tone. He wasn't hiding behind Laura's usual forceful insistence or the defensive neutrality he often used. "Megan, I need to tell you the truth," he said, voice low. "Everything Laura said about you, it wasn't true. None of it. I should have spoken up back then, but I didn't. I'm sorry." I felt a flicker of the old shock, a reminder of how they had painted me as a problem, an intruder, a source of tension they no longer needed. But it didn't pierce me the way it once did. I had changed. I was no longer the person who would open my home blindly, no longer the one who would let deceit dictate her life. I listened, absorbing the admission, aware of the boundaries I had fought so hard to establish. After hanging up, I leaned back in my chair, the city's afternoon light filtering through the studio windows. I allowed myself a moment to breathe, not in relief, but in recognition of my growth. My apartment, small but fully my own, felt heavier with significance than any spacious room I had ever lived in under someone else's roof. I had rebuilt my world on my terms. The rest of the day passed in methodical planning. I reviewed every shelter's requirements, double-checked the financial aid forms, and finalized the comprehensive list that would allow Laura and Mark to secure help without putting me in jeopardy. It was a careful balance, providing them the means to recover while firmly maintaining the boundaries that had once been violated. Every entry on that document reminded me of the nights I had spent in my car, shivering under thin blankets, staring at the dashboard, wondering if my career would survive the loss of stability. Now, I could guide them towards safety without sacrificing my own hard-won peace. That distinction, I realized, was the difference between compassion and self-erasure. By the evening, the document was complete. Names, addresses, phone numbers, eligibility notes, all neatly organized, ready for immediate use. I saved it, printed a copy, and stacked it neatly beside my drawing table. The work gave me a sense of control, an affirmation that I could honor my values without being consumed by the obligations others assumed I had. When I finally sat back, letting the city's muted glow wash over the room, I reflected on the journey. The calls, the manipulation, the false accusations, it had all led me here. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was navigating the world with clarity, discernment, and self-respect. Laura and Mark's situation was dire, undeniably so. But it was no longer mine to solve through personal sacrifice. I had given them tools, not shelter. I had provided guidance, not refuge. And in doing so, I preserved the life I had painstakingly rebuilt from fragments of betrayal, exhaustion, and cold nights. Sitting in my studio, surrounded by sketches, furniture arranged with purpose, and the faint hum of city life outside, I felt a quiet, resolute strength. I would not allow the past to dictate my present. I had endured, adapted, and emerged capable of helping without losing myself. For the first time in over a year, I slept knowing that my boundaries were intact, my principles unbroken, and my life, finally, entirely my own. The knock on my door comes early, sharp, insistent. I open it to find my parents standing there, shoulders tense, eyes searching for a response they hope will bend my resolve. They don't waste time on pleasantries. Their words tumble out, urgent and insistent. My sister and her family are in crisis, homeless, needing a place to stay, even if only temporarily. They speak in that soft, persuasive tone I've known all my life, the one that used to make my chest tighten, the one that now meets my calm resolve. I step aside to let them in, gesturing toward the narrow space I call home. Every inch reflects the effort, the struggle, and the hard-won stability I've built over the past year. They notice the small table, the carefully arranged drawings, the faint scent of freshly brewed coffee, but they seem to see only what they want to see, a potential solution, a temporary roof. I remain seated at my drawing table, letting the weight of silence stretch between us before I speak. I recount the nights I spent in my car, the bitter cold that seeped into my bones, the constant uncertainty, the way the wind whistled through cracked windows as I tried to sleep. I tell them about the projects I nearly lost, the clients I almost disappointed, the moments when I questioned whether I could keep moving forward. Their faces shift with discomfort, some guilt, though they do not fully meet my eyes. Then I hand them the folder. Thick, meticulously organized, filled with every resource I've found for families in crisis, shelters, emergency grants, rental assistance programs, and community organizations. I explain that this is the most tangible, practical help I can offer. I do not offer my home. I offer tools, guidance, information, ways for them to rebuild without uprooting the boundaries I've fought to establish. A week passes. The family gathers for a shared meal at my parents' home. The table is crowded, the air heavy with unspoken tension. I distribute copies of the documents I'd prepared, walking them through the timeline, rent payments I made while living with my sister, the letters, the financial records, the emails. Each piece is a marker of truth, a shield against the narratives that once tried to rewrite my story. Eyes widen as they read. My sister shifts uneasily in her seat, the practiced calm she wears like armor beginning to crack. For the first time, my brother-in-law nods quietly, acknowledging the reality of the situation without deflection. My parents exchange glances, recognition dawning, a mixture of shock and regret settling over them. They see the scope of the deception for what it was, the lies, the manipulation, the years of subtle erasure of my experience. I do not gloat. I do not relish their discomfort. I remain steady, my voice measured, my gaze unwavering. I am not seeking vindication. I am restoring the balance that was lost. I am reclaiming the dignity, respect, and truth that were taken from me. By the end of the evening, the conversation has shifted. My parents ask questions, tentatively, about how to help in practical ways, about how to use the information I provided. My sister, finally confronted with facts, says little, her usual defenses muted. I watch and listen, content to let reality speak for itself, knowing that true resolution begins with clarity, honesty, and boundaries maintained. When the meal ends and everyone leaves, I sit alone at my drawing table. The apartment is quiet, the chaos of the family drama left behind. I feel the steady pulse of my own life, intact and uninterrupted. I have offered help in the way that truly matters, without sacrificing my hard-won sanctuary. For the first time in a long time, the notion of family is not tied to fear, obligation, or manipulation. It is tied to respect, understanding, and the careful preservation of self. In the weeks that followed, I watched from a careful distance as Laura and Mark navigated the aftermath of their collapse. Thanks to the resources I had provided, emergency housing programs, family assistance funds, and community support, they finally secured a temporary home. I felt a measure of relief knowing the children were safe, yet I remained steadfast in protecting the boundaries I had fought so hard to establish. Meanwhile, my life in Seattle began to bloom in ways I had only dared imagine during those long nights in my car. The studio apartment I had moved into, once a cramped and intimidating space, gradually transformed into a sanctuary of my own design. Friends brought furniture salvaged from various corners, mismatched yet functional, filling the small space with warmth. The sunlight streamed through the eastern windows each morning, casting light across my sketches, my work, and my slowly rebuilt life. For the first time in months, I felt rooted, capable, and free. Encouraged by this newfound stability, I took the next bold step, opening my own design studio. The downtown location was modest, but every detail, from the polished floors to the artful arrangement of workstations, reflected my vision. Clients began to arrive steadily, drawn not only by my portfolio but by the quiet confidence I carried after months of overcoming uncertainty. The studio became more than a workplace. It was a statement of independence and the tangible result of perseverance. Months later, I purchased my own apartment. The process was nerve-wracking, yet exhilarating. For the first time, the keys in my hand represented not temporary shelter but a permanent home built through my own efforts. Friends and colleagues gathered for the housewarming, filling the space with laughter, conversation, and recognition. Among them, Samantha stood as a constant reminder of loyalty and shared struggle. We raised our glasses together in a toast, not merely to walls and furniture, but to resilience, integrity, and the life we chose to create from hardship. Even amidst these celebrations, I kept the lessons of the past close. My phone rang with messages from my mother, tentative attempts to bridge the gap that had opened during the years of misunderstanding. We met at a neutral cafe, and for the first time, I felt her understanding begin to take shape. No pretense, no manipulation, simply acknowledgement of truth. Step by step, conversation by conversation, a foundation was laid for a relationship rebuilt on honesty rather than assumption. Driving past the old house where I had lived under Laura's roof, I felt none of the longing or anger that had once occupied me. The driveway, the windows, the rooms, they held memories, yes, but I had grown beyond them. The pain of betrayal, the nights spent shivering in a car, the struggle to hold on to my dignity, all of it remained a part of my story, but it no longer defined my present. I felt only a calm acceptance and gratitude for the life I had built, for the family I had chosen. That evening, after the last guest had departed from my apartment, I lingered in the quiet. My home was exactly as I had envisioned it, a reflection of my creativity, my resilience, and my hard-won independence. The walls, the sunlight, the small desk where I sketched each design, all belonged to me and me alone. In the soft glow of the city lights outside, I realized that freedom was not simply the absence of constraint, but the presence of choice. Every decision, every boundary, every act of self-respect had led me here. I was home, not in the shadows of others, not in borrowed rooms, but fully, completely, and undeniably myself. For the first time in a long time, I slept without fear, without the weight of expectation pressing against my chest. My life was no longer dictated by the whims of family or circumstance. I had built a sanctuary, a career, and a network of loyalty that reflected the truths I held dear. The past remained, but it no longer held power over me. I had survived, grown, and created, and as the city slept around me, I knew that every choice I had made, every struggle endured, had brought me to this singular point of clarity and peace, an existence entirely my own.